Yes, it's another train video. Today we're looking at an electrical multiple unit. And these aren't just any old electrical multiple unit, these were the first ones to be built out of the BR standard coach design, which would be otherwise known as the Mark 1 coach. They would be built between 1957 and 1963, primarily for use on the Southeastern Division's Kent Coast electrification scheme. However, they would go on to have incredibly long lives on the Southern. And if you were a regular traveller on the Southern region or Network Southeast during the days of the slam door trains, there's a strong possibility that you've travelled on one of these. In today's episode, we look at the 4 CEP and the 4 BEP electrical multiple units. Hello and welcome. Well, the last train video that I did seemed to go down very well and it attracted a lot of positive comments, so I thought I'd do another one, again just to really test the water. Now, a lot of you have said how about a DMU or something a little bit more modern like a pacer. Well, I've actually already done a video on pacers and I'll try to remember to put a link up to it in the top right hand corner of this video so you can watch it at your leisure. Now, the big difference between doing these train videos and the bus videos is that I work in the bus industry and have done for quite a few years. So I've got quite an inside knowledge on what goes on and how things work. I've never worked in the railway industry at all, although at points I would have loved to have done, but that's kind of past now. I'm quite happy sticking with buses. So these videos are done from an enthusiast's point of view. I've not had any professional dealings with them. I've not worked on them. I've not driven them or anything like that. I've travelled on them. But there will be people who watch this video who've been up close and personal with these units. And I'd love to hear your memories and your recollections of them in the comments down below. And some people who are watching this video will know them a lot better than I do. So just bear with me, and as I say, this is from an enthusiast's point of view rather than somebody who's worked in the industry and knows them inside out. So I thought I'd start with the 4 CEP and the 4 BEP, as they're units that are a little bit close to my heart, growing up in the Kent Coast, Ramsgate to be precise. During the 1980s, if we went anywhere on a train, it was on one of these. And to be fair, that was probably the same story for most of the 60s and the 1970s too, and potentially well into the 1990s. In fact, they were so common that you tended just to overlook them and think, oh, there's one of those again. And typically, it's only when they start to disappear that you actually start to notice them and think, wait, when am I going to ride on one of these things again? There would be a total of 133 of these 4-car mainline electrical multiple units built, and this would comprise of both 4 BEP, and the BEP stood for buffet electro-pneumatic, that's highlighting the fact that there was a buffet car and the braking system, and 4 CEP, and that would stand for corridor electro-pneumatic. These would be built between 1957 and 1963. However, before this, 4 prototype sets would be built during 1956, and these would be numbered 7101 to 7104. Now, as I said in the introduction, these would be the first mainline electrical multiple units that would be built to the BR standard coach design, the Mark 1 carriage, and these would basically amount to a Mark 1 body mounted on an EMU type underframe, which was fitted with electrical equipment and electro-pneumatic braking. The frames would be built at Ashford Works, and the construction of the units would be finished off and carried out at Eastleigh. These 4 prototype units would be allocated to Brighton and would be used on the Central Division. Their formation would be MBSO, motor brake second open, TCK, trailer composite corridor, a TSK, trailer second corridor, and an MBSO, motor brake second open. Now, can somebody who knows all about railways tell me, please, why they actually classify carriages with corridors, which obviously is spelt with a C, they classify that with a K. That is something that has puzzled me for absolute years and years and years. If you know the answer, just bung it down below and put me out my misery. This is something that's been troubling me for 20, 30 or maybe even 40 years. And I keep forgetting to ask people who know about things. So if you do know the answer to it, please comment down below. The total passenger accommodation in a 4-carriage set would be 224 seated passengers, and that would work out with 200 second-class passengers and 24 first. The motor brake second open cars would weigh around 40 tonnes and would contain a full-width driving cab with access via the guards compartment, which was situated immediately behind it. The trailer coaches would weigh between 30 and 31 tonnes each. Traction equipment carried was 2 English Electric 250 horsepower traction motors, and these would be mounted under the leading end of each of the motor brake second open car. The units would be coupled with Buckeye couplings, and on the outer ends high level air pipes were also fitted together with electrical control jumpers. These units would be gangwayed throughout, and they would have Pullman style connections at the unit ends. The MBSO would also have a 70-volt motor generator fitted underneath it to provide power for control and coach lighting. These initial 4 prototype units proved highly successful and very popular, and this would see further production vehicles being ordered during 1957 and 1958. And these would be for service on the newly electrified Kent coastlines. These units would carry the numbers 7105 to 7153, and this fleet would be closely modelled on the earlier pre-production prototype units. There would be a number of small changes. The EP contactor equipment would be swapped over to be replaced with the latest type of 1957 camshaft control equipment, and only one of the MBSO vehicles would be fitted with a motor generator set. Other modifications would be made to the bogies, the brake equipment, and there would be different sound insulation and heating in the production vehicles. Also, the production units would be fitted with a different interior. The prototype units had a very traditional interior, which had a lot of wood veneer on bulkhead panels. In fact, the prototype units had been furnished internally in a very similar way to the 4 core units, which dated all the way back to 1937. Now, several of these new units would be completed before they were required for their new service, and this would see them being stored at Lancing, Gatwick and on the Bluebell branch between Ardingly and Horsted Keynes, which at the time was being operated as a single line railway. However, when these units entered service on the Kent coastline, all was not to prove very well. After only a short time, there were complaints received from railway staff and the passengers as well regarding the units' rough riding, and this dissatisfaction with the ride would see the next batch of units, which were ordered during 1960, being fitted with Commonwealth all-steel type bogies. Now, these were fitted with roller bearings, which greatly improved the ride. This third batch of units would have the running numbers of 7154 to 7204 and would be of an identical appearance to the previous units, and these would be delivered between August 1960 and September 1961. Now, the South Western Division also ordered 4 CEP units as well, these being ordered during 1962 and amounting to a further 7 units of the same design. These would carry the numbers 7205 to 7211. However, these wouldn't operate on the South Western Division for many years and would soon join their elder sisters operating on the South Eastern Division. Now, to operate alongside the CEP units was a fleet of BEP units, and initially 2 were constructed to operate with the prototype units, and these would be numbered 7001 and 7002. These would be constructed at Eastleigh alongside the prototype vehicles 7101 to 7104. These were identical except that the TSK coach was replaced by a TRB, Trailer Restaurant Buffet. Overall, across the unit, it would decrease the second class seating to 132, but would give 21 unclassified seats in the buffet car. The buffet car was powered by a motor generator mounted on the underframe of the coach. However, when built, due to the late delivery of these buffet cars, the two sets were put into traffic as 3-car CEP formations. The first production batch of the BEP units would be 7003 to 7012. And again, these would be for the Kent Coast Phase 1 electrification and would feature the modifications that the production CEP units had. As the Kent Coast electrification scheme entered Phase 2, a further 10 BEP units, which were numbered 7013 to 7022, were ordered, and these were constructed during early 1961. Now, an interesting little factoid was in the mid-1960s, air conditioning was actually fitted to the buffet car on Unit 7022, and this was for evaluation purposes, but it was not fitted to subsequent units. The prototype units of both the CEPs and the BEPs stayed allocated to Brighton for use on business trains when new and remained there for most of the 20 years that followed. They would then be allocated to Ramsgate, and the majority of the units that were allocated to the Kent Coast electrification programme actually stayed in that area. When new, the units were delivered in green. However, this would be subsequently changed to all blue on many of the units, but from the late 1960s, the 4 CEPs and the 4 BEPs were painted in the blue and grey livery. Under the TOPS numbering system in the 1970s, the CEP units would become the Class 411 and the BEP units would become the Class 410, and these would be subclassed 1 and 2 depending on what sort of equipment they would carry. By the mid-1970s, it was clear that no new stock would be arriving on the Kent coastline, and they would have to make do with these 4 CEP and 4 BEP units. 1975 would see the start of a refurbishment programme being planned, which would involve completely rebuilding these 20-year-old units from the frames upwards. A prototype set number 7153 underwent extensive rebuilding at Eastleigh and emerged in its new form during November 1975. Following the rebuilding, the new formation of the train would be DMS, driving motor second, TBC, trailer brake composite, TS, trailer second, and a DMS again, driving motor second. The rebuilding had removed the brake van and guards compartment from behind the driving cars to a new central position in the unit. Now, this would bring the units more into line with the more modern 1963 design stock. The former guards compartment behind the driving cab had been opened up and turned into a second-class seating bay, and the cab was reached via a transverse gangway to the rear of the cab, this being in common with this more modern electrical multiple units. It was the former trailer composite corridor vehicle that was converted into the new trailer brake composite, with 2 of the former 3 second-class compartments being converted, this area becoming the guards van with a small office that adjoined it. The remaining second-class compartment at the outer end of the coach remained together with its adjacent toilet. This revised layout would now mean that there was seats for 24 first-class passengers and 198 second-class passengers, and this would only mean 2 less than when the unit was in its original form, but in theory would give passengers a more pleasant environment. Now, as I mentioned, Unit 7153 was a bit of a prototype for the rebuilding and the facelifting, and it would feature modern upholstery and fluorescent lighting, but the original style windows would be retained. There would be a little bit of a modification made to the Pullman gangways at the unit ends, and to improve the ride, it was fitted with Commonwealth bogies throughout. except of course the powered bogies. When it came out of Eastleigh Works, 7153 was the feature of much press and passenger attention, and was shown off around the various stations in the region. The new appearance of this unit was widely accepted, and a full refurbishment plan was authorised for the complete fleet. However, Eastleigh would be unable to cope with the large number of units involved, and so the BREL works at Swindon had spare capacity, and it was decided that the programme should be undertaken there. This would mean that the units would have to be loco-hauled from the southern region over to Swindon, and this would see a new transverser installed at Swindon Works for the EMU refurbishment programme, which would make easy access to all the shop bays. Now there would be various differences between the prototype unit 7153 and the production refurbished units. The most obvious would be that the windows would be replaced by a tinted glass drop hopper type, and originally all the non-powered bogies were meant to be of the Commonwealth type, but this rather ramped up the costs a little bit, and it meant that later units would be returned to the southern region mounted on their original bogies. These refurbished units would start to be introduced during 1979, and this would also coincide with the start to renumber these units into the BR 6-digit computer-based TOPS system, and it would see the units carrying the 411 prefix to their numbers. However, the Southern soon decided to drop the first two digits, and the units were now referred to in the 15 and 16,000 range. During the refurbishment programme, the units were mixed up, and they didn't all come back in their original numbering system, so it was decided to make a fresh start on renumbering under the new system. Of the 4 BEP units, only 7 would be retained and refurbished, with the remaining BEP units being converted into standard 4 CEP units. This being done by replacing the buffet car with a standard trailer, which had been converted from conventional locomotive-hauled coaching stock. Now, interestingly, between 1983 and 1986, several of these unrefurbished buffet cars would find a second life just before they headed off to the railway yard in the Skye. It was decided to refurbish several of the 4 BIG units, and whilst they were out of the equation, it was also decided to form what was known as a 4 TEP unit, and this would consist of 3 carriages from a refurbished CEP unit with an unrefurbished buffet car from a BEP unit. There were 4 of these units that were based at Brighton and were mostly used on the London to Hastings line. By 1986, though, the units had been disbanded once the refurbishment programme was complete, and the coaches were reformed into standard 4 CEP units, with the unrefurbished buffet cars being scrapped. Now, slightly after this, from 1985, there was a new livery that started to appear on the CEP. In March 1985, Unit 1602 appeared in what would become known as the Jaffa Cake livery. Oh, I quite like Jaffa Cakes. I've actually got some here. I'm just going to have a quick nibble. Oh, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Sorry about that. So the Jaffa Cake livery was the livery of the London and South East sector of British Rail, and this was before it became Network South East. This livery was carried by many of the 4 CEP units, but also by some of the Class 309 units, as well as a few of the 4 CIG units, but they didn't wear it for very long. They were soon repainted back into the blue and grey. The CEP units, though, continued to wear it for quite a long time in the southeast, and this is the colours that I actually remember them wearing when I travelled on them. 1602, the unit that was first painted, was done at Selhurst, and it was also held for a press launch of the new livery at Rochester on the 8th of May 1985. From late 1988, the remaining 7 4 BEP units were modified, and these would be fitted with Mark 6 motor bogies and B5 trailer bogies. Now, I did read somewhere that these bogies came from the REP stock that used to work down on the Bournemouth line and used to pull the TC coaches, the trailer control coaches. And these featured very high powered traction motors and were known as Greyhound units. So if that's true, comment down below and let me know. I can't remember where I saw it, but I'm sure that's what I read somewhere. Or am I just talking at the top of my head? Let me know, please. All of the class would eventually go on to wear the Network Southeast livery. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that that's probably one of the best liveries that came out of the sectorisation, don't you? Maybe that and the Dutch. What do you think? Comment down below. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and your comments on this. What was your favourite of the sectorisation liveries that BR had? Over the years, there were several vehicles in the fleet that were withdrawn and scrapped due to accident or fire damage. But the first undamaged unit started to be withdrawn early in 1993, with the first 5 1951 units being amongst the first to go to scrap. Also in 1993 would see the formation of 6 3-car units, with the trailer second being removed and the trailer composite being downgraded to standard class only. This would see them being renumbered 1401 to 1406. This would be incredibly short-lived though, all being withdrawn from service in June 1994, and after a short while in store they were all sold for scrap. As the railways were privatised in the mid-1990s, the different divisions of British Rail were divided up into the different franchises, and this would see the 3 former Southern Region divisions, the South Eastern, the South Central and the South Western, all operating for CEP units. However, the units themselves, both the 4 CEPs and the 4 BEPs, would be allocated to the ownership of Porterbrook Train Leasing Company. The South Eastern Division, which at the time would be operated by Connex South Eastern, would inherit the largest fleet of the 4 CEP units. Now those high-speed units that I mentioned earlier on that had been fitted with the high-speed Mark 6 motor bogies, the Greyhound bogies, well, these were briefly operated by the South Central Division, which was operated as Connex South Central. These would mostly be used on London Bridge to Brighton Express services, but they were non-standard in the South Central fleet, and they would be withdrawn and transferred over to the South West Trains fleet. And talking of which, the South West Division franchise was won by the Stagecoach Group and was operated as South West Trains. Now initially they didn't have any standard 4 CEP units, but it did operate the 7 4 BEP units. Eventually though, SWT would go on to acquire 29 of the standard 4-car CEP units. The next few years would see both divisions that operated the CEPs and the BEPs make various changes and reformations to the units as the business required it. On the former South Eastern Division, withdrawal of the units started in 1999, with them being replaced by the new Class 375 Electrostar units. Now the plan was originally for them to be all withdrawn by the year 2000, but things don't always work out like they're intended to, do they? And the 375 Electrostars had a lot of bugs when they first arrived and suffered from rather poor reliability. As a result of this, many of the 4 CEPs would be retained beyond the date envisaged. However, by March 2003, there was only 7 units left in service. But by the beginning of 2004, these would be withdrawn. But they would be replaced with units being cascaded from South West Trains. The last ones would run on the South Eastern Division in September 2005. The units were quickly dispatched to Immingham for scrap. The South West Division was a little bit different. Their standard units lasted until early 2004, when they were either withdrawn and scrapped or transferred over to South Eastern Trains, as I've just mentioned. One particular unit, 1198, was a former BEP unit, but it had been converted into a 3 CEP unit with the removal of the buffet car. This was done to replace a similar conversion that had operated the Lymington Flyer service on the Lymington branch, and that had been numbered 1199. 1198 would be withdrawn at the end of December 2004 and would head into preservation. This would lead two former BEP buffet units, 2311 and 2315, in service, and these would last until they were withdrawn in March 2005. Again, both of these would later be preserved, although apparently without the buffet cars. They're preserved as standard for CEPs. Over the years, several units in the fleet had seen use with the departmental units of British Rail, and this would include such uses as tractor units, route learning units, and test cars. Well, we've reached the end of the train, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I actually enjoyed researching it and making it. As I said, it's just a very brief history about these units, and there's going to be things that I've missed out due to time constraints and things like that. If I've missed out something that's important to you, I do apologise, but comment down below and let me know. Also, share your memories and recollections and thoughts on these units. Did you, like me, travel on them regularly, or did you even drive them or work on them? If you did enjoy this video, please like, hype and share it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss my future releases in this and the other series that's here on the channel. There's quite a lot to suit everybody's taste, I think, from buses, coaches and now trains. Maybe one day we might even do ferries as well. Remember the days of Sea-Link. If you are enjoying the content, you can always buy me a drink, non-alcoholic, from the buffet car. If you click on the Super Thanks button, you can follow the instructions from there, and thank you ever so much in advance. It's very kind of you. I'll try not to spill it as I walk back to my compartment. Thank you so very much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.